Before the main part of the podcast, I would like to give a little shout out to the University of Hertfordshire, who are doing a doctoral study on something that is often overlooked in academia. They're conducting research into the experiences of parents or carers who help to look after a child or children where the family has a parent that has mental health difficulties. Now, that is a bit of a mouthful, but what they're looking for are people that are supporting a family where the parent or a parent has a mental health condition and you're supporting their child within the family. And this study is aiming to learn more about the experiences of parents and carers who look after a child or children in the family where the parent has a mental health difficulty. So, for example, this is if someone has a parent that has been living with bipolar or any other kind of mental health issue. So in this situation, what they're looking for are people such as the partner of the parent who is suffering from a mental health issue, the grandparents, older siblings, aunts and uncles, and so that's anyone that is really providing support to the child who is living with a parent that has a mental health issue. And these people will be often providing emotional support for the child. They may also help out with household chores and so forth. And these people are really important to the family and supporting the family generally. However, there's been a lack of research done on this area. So the guys at the University of Hertfordshire are looking for people who are looking after a child or children aged 4 to 17 with a parent that has a mental health difficulty. So this could be officially diagnosed or it could not be. So it doesn't really matter if it's diagnosed or not. Participants are expected or should be willing to take part in an interview with the researcher to talk about your experiences. And what will happen is that it will go into the larger study for the researchers to find out more about how your support is impacting the family and yourself. If you are willing to help out in this research, you will be asked to take part in an hour-long interview, and this interview and its location is generally flexible depending on your individual needs. And if you are nowhere near Hertfordshire, they can do the interview via Skype with you. So if there's anyone out there that's listening to this podcast and you think that you fit this criteria and you would like to find out more about how you can get involved with this research, all you need to do is send an email to r.bishop@hearts.ac.uk, or you can tweet at BeccaJBG. I will put all of this in the show notes for you so that if you are interested and would like to participate, you can easily find the information. I think that this piece of research will be invaluable to those that are looking after or helping out a family who has mental health issues ongoing, and you telling them your own personal experiences can help with them supporting other people who find themselves in the situation as well as yourself. So that was just a little bit of a shout out to this research study being conducted at the University of Hertfordshire by Becca. So good luck, Becca, in your recruitment of participants. Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and
Becky Lawrence.
And today we are looking at Autism, Anxiety and Me by Louise Bridge and the foreword by her mother Penelope Bridge. It was published in 2016 by Jessica Kingsley Publishers, and the Goodreads rating for this book is 4 stars with 11 ratings and 6 reviews, and the Amazon rating is 5 stars with 4 reviews. So I gave this book a 4 and Becky, you gave it a 3.
I thought it was a really good book. I enjoyed the author and the way she writes. I just thought, because it was not a storybook and it didn't have me gripped all the way through, I didn't give it a higher rating. But that's just partly because of the style of the book and the type of book that it is, because it's not a fictional book. It is a book that is written by somebody who is autistic, and she is writing to share her experiences with the world, which I think is really brave and a really great thing to have done.
I really enjoyed it, probably because I don't necessarily work with people with autism, although I do suspect that my husband is somewhere upon the autistic spectrum, particularly with some of the traits, and the book did give me
sort of more insight
into his behaviour and some of the traits that I see with him. So yeah, no, I found it very interesting.
I thought it was good that it's not just written by Emma Louise Bridge, and she writes really well and really frankly. It's also got in between each of her chapters, it is got her mother writing notes about being autistic in general, and even gives tips on if you know someone with autism or you're working with someone that's autistic. She has an education background, she's a teacher herself, so she is kind of using it as that. And that's how actually we came upon this book. I've been studying to become a SENCO, a Special Educational Needs Coordinator in schools, and I came across this book looking into the link between autism and anxiety, and that's where we came upon this, and we thought it'd be a good book to discuss autism but also to discuss anxiety, which often comes alongside autism and is something that we're seeing more and more in secondary schools, how it's the anxiety that plays out and then causes a lot of the behaviour issues that autistic children get labelled with.
So the book description is written by Emma, and it says, "Surely my way is not always wrong, just because it's different from other people's ways. I mean, everyone's way is weird to someone." In her 24 years, Emma has experienced a lot, and much of this has been coloured by her autism and social anxiety. Funny and self-aware, this collection of Emma's diary entries capture her hidden thoughts and insightful explanations as to why the world can be such a puzzling place. Wry observations on social rules, friendships, relationships, and facing changes give compelling insights into how Emma confronts challenges and her determination to live life to the fullest. Helpful advice at the end of each entry also give practical strategies for coping with common issues.
Yeah, it's a really good book. I think it's worth reading, even if you don't know anybody with autism, which you probably do, even without realising. It is a spectrum disorder, which means that people can have it very mildly, or people can have it very strongly as well.
So you looked up some statistics about ASD. So in this particular book, we have Emma, who is a female with autism, and you found that the statistics show that it's more common in boys.
Yeah, it is more common in boys. 1 in 42 children with ASD are boys, whereas it's 1 in 189 for girls. So children, they're saying 1 in 68 children have autism these days, but boys are 5 times more likely to have autism than girls. Now, partially this is because of the lack of diagnosis, although they are also, I read an article that was linking to actually possibly a genetic link to the reason. Being diagnosed as a female is much more difficult. This is because of the symptoms being different in girls. Girls are taught from a very young age due to their gender about life skills in learning how to socially interact. They're able to mimic a lot more behaviours like that because of the very, very young age of conditioning where we're taught about dolls and life situations from a child's way. So because of that, it is often very late in diagnosis. I mean, from this book, it's not just Emma who has autism, it's her sister, and they are diagnosed at the age of 19 and 23. So that is really late in diagnosis. Most children are diagnosed in primary school. You get a few diagnoses in secondary school, but very few adults are then diagnosed with it as well.
Which I think is interesting because unless you have that diagnosis, you don't get the additional support that is needed for a person that is suffering with ASD.
No, but I also think it goes further than that. You don't get an understanding of yourself because your brain works differently if you are autistic. And it's that understanding of actually, you're not just different because you're different. You're different because your brain works differently. There's a reason for that. You're not just weird. It is actually a medical thing that's going on. And I think that understanding can help you bring more acceptance of yourself.
Yeah, and I think that is summarised by some of Emma's entries, where she basically says that the diagnosis just explains why she does the things the way she does things.
Yeah, no, it does. And she's really articulate. I really like the way she writes in the book, and she's really frank about her diagnosis. And she does understand that she needs to learn some of the social interactions so that she can not be rude to people. But at some times she also goes, but you know what? Actually, why am I the one that always has to change? So there does seem to be that element of, yes, I have to understand, and yes, I have to do some things, but also people should have an awareness so that they don't just assume I'm being rude when actually I'm autistic.
Yeah, and I remember having a discussion with you before we came to do this podcast, was about, is it the fact that in some situations we are expecting her to conform to what society dictates we are to do, whereas are we,
I think that's true. I think we are telling autistic children that you need to conform to what society expects of you. But I also think that we are all told to do that. as we grow up, we're told you have to smile even if you don't like the present you're given, for example.
I had the best thing the other day. I was sat outside a cafe drinking a cup of tea, and a child asked, why did people say bless you after you sneeze? And her mum said, I don't know, but all I know is that you say it even if you don't like the person and you don't want to bless them. I was like, that's parenting at the finest.
Well, that's the society telling you. Even if you're not religious, people say bless you after you've sneezed.
Because it's polite. And it's the thing to do.
But actually, yeah, it is actually a superstition as to why people do it. So, yeah, I think that's it's a really good example of how our society has put things in our way to what we all have to do. And I think that's harder if you have a condition. It means that you find those things even harder to do than normal.
And we see in the diary entries that Emma writes about the fact that we are all living to this secret list of rules and society's rules, and that she hasn't been given a copy, and that because she hasn't been given this copy, she just doesn't know where she stands in the world.
Yeah, and she would love to write one or have one written for her. She says, maybe I should do this and write down a book, because she just doesn't get some of the social interactions. One in particular is that sometimes she says things and people laugh and she actually means them literally, and they're taking some kind of sarcastic or in some way comic meaning from it. Or say people will make a joke and she'll laugh and she'll be like, but why is that funny? Because
I don't get it.
Yeah, she writes in the book that jokes are often lies, and lies are bad, so why are jokes funny?
It's just really interesting, because it's the fact that everything is taken so literally that I didn't realise just how extreme it could be. We have broken down the book into some areas that we'd like to talk about, and we've looked at something called literal thinking. We've also looked at social interactions, environment, and the decision-making process that we can find within people with ASD, and also some sensory issues that people with ASD may face. And I, again, didn't realise how significant some of these things were.
Yeah, I mean, I've had to work with, obviously, a few students with autism. And as we've discussed before, we've had to make alterations. Like, we have a student that wears trainers instead of normal school shoes. And actually, Clark's this year have just brought out a set of school shoes specifically designed for children with autism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I believe it's for primary school age, not secondary. But yeah, I read something recently about how they'd actually brought out this particular type of shoe, and that this kid, it was a mother that was writing it, and they able to take their kid to go shoe shopping and it not be an ordeal. They actually put the shoes on, obviously a bit anxious at first, because they never actually are the ones they are comfortable with. They've always worn trainers, but they've actually tried them on and loved them, and loved the fact that they get to fit in that little bit more because they're wearing the shoes like everybody else,
and they're not singled out.
But they are comfortable. And that's the thing, is when we think about this sensory overload, we're talking about actually it making your skin crawl or your skin feel wrong or different. The itching, as if you're wearing a woolen jumper that makes you itch, that we've all felt, none of us like. They can get that from something as simple as a cotton shirt. But because it's a different brand, it's slightly different weave that we wouldn't even notice, they do. Because their sensory overload happens and they can feel it. It's really interesting. She talks about how even just seeing an insect makes all of her skin crawl, because it just gets in her skin just by seeing that insect, and she can feel her skin crawling and as if they're all over her. And I mean, I can relate. I got stung by a wasp 10 times on my back when I was a kid. So every time I see a wasp, my whole back starts to tingle, and you kind of go, I can kind of see where she's coming from.
But this is to such an extreme level.
Yeah. And now she has no control over it. And it doesn't just go with the feeling, it's all senses. So their taste buds are much more significant. So therefore, when they're eating food, texture is so much more of a thing. Anything with lumps or particular seeds in it or anything like that is going to cause problems. Like bread with grain in rather than normal bread is going to be an issue.
Exactly. And we have entries in Emma's diary where she talks about the fact that not only does she have to be gluten-free, she also can't deal with bits, and it's easier for her to say that she's allergic to things than it is to explain to people the preferences and her specific needs. And I thought that it was really interesting where she talks about she's gone away on some kind of retreat and that they give her gluten-free bread with bits in, and she's like, it was okay because I could smother it in butter and I couldn't taste it. But for others, they wouldn't necessarily be able to reach that compromise and would just be like, no, I can't eat it, full stop.
Yeah, and how she finds there's biscuits and she doesn't like them because of their texture and stuff, but she still takes them because she also can't say no, because she has to conform. She can't make a fuss because that would also trigger some of the anxiety that she feels. But yeah, and it's also the noise as well. There was an entry where she talks about being at church, and it was a new church. They'd moved churches, and she was sitting at the back in a pew, but unfortunately the noise just got too much for her. So she left the church, and they've now created a space for her.
I thought that was so accommodating and so fantastic that the church has made a specific effort to allow her to still be part of it.
Yeah, so they could sit behind a glass door, basically, so they can still see it, they can still hear what's going on, although it's muffled, so it's not as overwhelming, but they could still be part of what's going on, but it's at her sort of way. She also is able to take headphones with her, and she can put those in if it's too much, reducing the noise level, and especially when she was saying when they're singing and that happens, it's just too much for her.
And also before the service, when everyone is just talking to each other, that must be overwhelming.
Yeah, and we find this in schools, it is, different classrooms are much more overwhelming. Doing group work, where you get them to prepare for a presentation or something, drama lessons in particular, it's so overwhelming for students with autism because of the sensory overload. Even things like inner science, where you have to then wear your lab coat or you have to put on the goggles, and all of that is playing up with them. And it's like if you walk down the street, you will be acknowledging things without realizing it. It's warm. There's a bee there. I'm walking on the pavement. To them, that is like fluorescent signs going off as you walk down the street. It is literally like, oh my god, there's a bee, I can't get out of my head, what am I going to do? Oh look, there's someone down the street, I'm going to have to cross the road. Oh my god, there's this going on. Oh that, am I walking at a fast pace? How's my breathing? What's going on? It literally is like an overload.
Which would explain why you would find it very anxious about leaving the house, because you've got all of these unknowns and all of these sensory inputs that would just be so much to handle in one go.
Yeah, and why she takes a lot of comfort in her family members who know her and understand her, whereas strangers are much more of an unknown. You don't know the reaction they're going to have towards you, and whether they're going to be positive and accommodating or whether they're going to be negative towards you.
And I also think that might be down to the fact that quite a few people may still be quite ignorant to this particular condition, is the fact that you have this stereotypical view that everyone is the same, that everyone is going to do the same things that society has dictated. And when someone breaks that norm, you find it quite difficult to understand.
Yeah, well, the media in radio and TV and that kind of stuff, the way it's portrayed is usually a very small amount of autistic students, about 5% or 3 to 5%, who have extreme high intelligence. And, it's the Rain Man, they call it, because of the film. And it's that idea that they're highly intelligent and that will see them through everything because they're just a genius, basically.
And it's such a small percentage that really I think people are misunderstanding the fact that actually others aren't necessarily going to have this super special power.
Yeah, and often autistic students or children do have things that they are obsessed with. It's the compulsion part of it. And so they are experts in the things that they're obsessed by. But when it comes to your broader education, that's not necessarily the link into everything.
And I think Emma also touches on this fact that everyone with autism isn't exactly the same. She reads an article, I believe, in the book, where they're saying that these people have special, like you said, these special traits, and the fact that it's mainly boys, and this particular article is talking about boys and boys with ASD, and she's like, well, instantly there's a problem there because I'm a girl and I have ASD. Yeah. And she's like, not all of us are exactly the same. And I think that's probably something that society forgets, is that not everyone is the same, even though we know that we aren't all the same.
And I think that's why one of the reasons it used to be a classification of autism, but also Asperger's, which was given the higher intelligence at the same time as having autism. However, because I think of this and the fact that it is a spectrum, and what classifies you as very intelligent to high intelligence, so instead they have declassified everything just under the bracket of autism, and then everyone's under that same big umbrella. But it is a huge umbrella, and it depends on what end you are on. I mean, Netflix, they've just started a series, haven't they, about autistic boy in his teenage years. I've not watched it yet, so I don't know how accurate and that it is, but it's nice to see stories out there. There's been a few BBC documentaries on autistic people and different ones, and I think that's really important to get more and more out there.
Not everyone is a Rain Man.
Yes.
And I think that's probably the issue with Hollywood and films, is that they portray it one way and actually in reality it isn't necessarily always going to be that way.
Well, they need the more entertaining maybe part of the personality.
Oh, of course.
And someone who gets intelligence at that high level seems to fit well into the stories of Mission Impossible.
Exactly, yeah. And one thing that I didn't realise was just how the literal thinking was literal. There is just no flexibility. It's either one way or another.
It is black or white.
And I just didn't realise I guess, again, it explains some of the reasons why my husband does the things he does, because there is no in between. It's either you clean it or you don't clean it. And if you're cleaning it, it's going to take him hours to do, and which is sweet and everything, because I get a very nice shiny house. However, there are other things in life that I need him to do or would like him to do. But yeah, just the fact that Emma talks about when she is asked to do some deadheading of the flowers, and that she's been given this task, they've explained this task to her, but she finds it extremely difficult because they haven't necessarily given her any of the parameters that she feels she needs to complete the task. And she's like, well, I need a ruler for this, and that would help me if I had a ruler. And she also talks about where she should make the cut to remove the deadhead. Should she do it halfway down? And then, oh, but halfway down it looks like I'm just cutting it into a twig. And then she's like, oh, well, what do I do next? And just all of this complication just because someone hasn't necessarily given her the instructions that she needs to carry out the task.
Yeah, she says, and this is a quote from the book, I was supposed to be deadheading flowers. It was actually very confusing though. And, you do think, well, it's deadheading flowers, you just chop them off.
Yeah, it's not that complicated.
But to her, you're right, she says, I tried cutting them short, but then they looked like they were obliterated, so there was a lot less, but then it wasn't quite enough, and then it looked like she was just giving the plants a trim, and yeah, she wanted a ruler, which to us might seem absolutely extreme, but actually to her, that would have had time. And she even contemplates, do I have time to go and get a ruler and then come back and measure them and check? And of course, a ruler wouldn't have worked because all the flowers would have been different sizes and stuff anyway. But it's that literal thinking of, it's all got to be the same.
And I also like the part where Emma describes herself as a teenager. So she describes herself as being ginger. She has glasses and she had braces, and that was a bully's dream. And she was like, I don't know if bullies actually dream of that kind of thing. Because when someone says it's a bully's dream, she's like, well, are they literally dreaming about people like me? And you go, not quite. It's just the fact that you've got all of the characteristics that people find easy to make fun of.
Yeah. And you're right, it's that literal part of it that she's thinking, which is why she talks about jokes and how she doesn't necessarily get them. And I liked the bit where she talked about taking medication.
Oh, that was so interesting.
And she said about how it says take with water, but she doesn't like water. And her mum said it's okay, she can have it with juice. But she's like, but the leaflet doesn't say that. The leaflet, and then she says, well, the leaflet can't cover everything because otherwise what was it saying? And she's like, but it's just got to say can be taken with water or equivalent or something. So then she knows it's okay. You can also take it with squash if you don't like water.
Also, the point where she's in the bath, I think that's really interesting. So she has this special medicated bath wash. That means that she has to stay in the bath for 20 minutes. And so she's put it in the bath, she's soaking in the bath. It gets to 20 minutes, but she can't get out of the bath because it's not an even number. So she waits. However, because she's waited too long, she misses the even number. And so she has to wait longer. So she ends up in the bath longer than the 20 minutes. And then she's struck with so much anxiety that I've been in the bath longer than I should have been. Is that going to be detrimental to my skin?
Yeah, because the bottle says 20 to 25 minutes or whatever it is. And so she's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And yeah, you're right. It does get that much anxiety. It's like when she goes shopping and her mum says, I need a box of lemon slices. And so she gets the lemon slices.
Because that's what it said on the list.
Yeah.
1 box of lemon slices.
But her mum noticed they were on offer. So she was like, but it says 2 for something. So why didn't you get a couple of boxes? They're on offer.
But you said get 1 box.
Yeah.
You didn't state unless it's on offer, get more.
Yeah. And it's that you have to literally be
that's specific. Exactly. It's the specificity that is required for them to be able to go, actually, there is another alternative than just what it says and rigidly sticking to what it's saying.
Yeah, and she knows this annoys people because she says, like, when she's got an appointment to go to and they've got to leave the house, she wants to know what time they're leaving the house. And of course, not everyone knows. They're like, oh yeah, in about 10 minutes. Well, no. Do you actually mean 10 minutes or do you mean 12 minutes or do you mean 8 minutes? Because obviously 9 and 11 are odd.
And I also like the fact that she's like, well, we need shoe putting on time and we need coat putting on time.
Yeah.
That kind of
she
thing.
says
And then
people
we'll
go,
leave at this
we'll
time.
leave at 4, and then she says, we get to the door at 4 and people are putting their shoes on. And she was like, no, you said we're leaving at 4. You didn't say put your shoes on at 4.
Yeah, exactly.
So and I think that's really interesting.
And also the fact that it states on her appointment what time to be there. And she's like, right, so if I get there right on time, I'm going to be late, because by the time I walk up the stairs to get to the appointment, it's then going to be past my appointment time. But then she's got to weigh up that if I get there really early, then I'm there really early, and that's going to inconvenience the other person. So it's kind of, again, it's this, where do you draw the line? Is it, if this is my appointment time, do I need to be in that place at that time?
Yeah, and she's like, because even if you open the door, the minute you step in, you're a few seconds late because you open the door on the exact time, and then by the time you're in the doorway, she's even thinking the seconds around that time, not even just the minutes. Like, oh, to us, we probably wouldn't even think about that.
No, I probably wouldn't even consider it.
No.
To be fair.
And I worry about being late. Like, I don't like being late. I want to be on time. I'm usually 5 to 10 minutes early. I'm usually way early sometimes.
This is something that me and my husband disagree on all the time. Is he is always late to everything, whereas I always like to be on time. So, yeah, it's quite interesting where his boundaries are.
He doesn't have, although he does present with a lot of autistic traits, the being on time is not one that he has.
No, much to my chagrin.
Yes. So we've kind of covered literal thinking. I found really interesting things she talked about the environment she was in. So things like when she has food, it has to be in 2s.
I love that. And she's like, right, okay, I can't have 2 complete fish cakes because that would be too much, but I can compromise if I take that fish cake and it's cut in half and then it's in 2. And how that is completely different to her sister.
Yeah. But it has to be 2 before it gets to her plate. So it has to be presented as 2 halves of a fish cake, and then she can take it.
Yeah.
She can't put it on her plate, then cut it in 2 and think of it as 2. And she eats these beans, and she gets to the point where she's finished her beans.
But she's found a sneaky one.
Yeah, and then she's like, but now I've only got an odd number of beans, and she doesn't like odd numbers whatsoever. It has to be even. And then she's like, I want more beans, but then if I have more beans, it goes...
Then more beans were gone. There was no more beans to have, which but there was, really caused an issue.
She's only got 1 bean, and it became a huge issue.
In the end, her solution to this problem was to smush up the beans, so it kind of became one...
Smush bean.
Yeah, smush bean. So it
could be counted.
Exactly, yeah. So... For Emma, you can see that she has the ability at points to compromise with her thinking, and that I think it's really interesting that her mother encourages her to come up with those compromises. It's not the fact that she's being told what she should be doing, it's the fact that there are things that she will find acceptable and unacceptable.
Yeah, and her mum says that in the book. She says, let them come up with it, help them to reach the areas, push them to make compromises, because they're going to have to live in the real world.
And not everything can be as black and white as you would hope.
Yeah, but at the same time, find ones that they're comfortable with that's not going to push their anxiety too far. And I think that's a really good tip.
She is definitely obsessed with 2s, so throughout the entire book, all of her diary entries are even numbers. I don't know if you noticed that she'd cut out all of the odd numbers. So it says
there's 84, I think, entries, but
it's
actually,
not.
It's actually not. 42.
Yeah, it's just that 1 and 3 and 5 and have all been cut from the book, which is understandable. If you've got a thing where you only can have and deal with even numbers, good for her.
It is called Autism, Anxiety and Me, a diary in even numbers.
Yeah, so that probably should give you an indication that there are no odd numbers.
Yeah, because odd numbers to her are wrong. There's something about them, and she knows that they are just wrong. She probably couldn't live in an odd numbered house. She couldn't have stayed in an odd numbered hotel room.
However, for her sister, she also doesn't like odd numbers, but she can cope with 1, whereas she can't, which I thought was interesting, where there's one person that's like, 1's all right because it's the beginning, but she's like, no, can't deal with 1 either.
1's wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do. I thought that was really interesting. I also liked how she places emotions onto things, and she says this, I know things don't have emotion, but she still battles with the idea that if she has 1 bedtime pal... So her bedtime pals are cuddly toys that she takes to bed with her at night to help her sleep, which I think was amazing. And the fact that she felt comfortable enough to share that with the reader. Yeah, at 24. Yeah, I really like the fact she had this bedtime pal, and then she got a new bedtime pal.
I know, I was like, I just want a bedtime pal now.
Yeah, and then she then had to come up with a rota to actually who was going to sleep in bed with her at any time, because if you had one but not the other one, then you're leaving the other one out. And although they don't have emotions, she's still leaving it out. So she needed to come up with this whole idea of what's going to happen.
And she came up with the schedule, which is really, again, another way to compromise with the fact that she was getting anxious by leaving out one bedtime pal.
Yeah, it did sound like she had schedules for everything. She seems to have made a lot of schedules, and that was one of the tips that the mother makes, that actually letting them, allow them, having schedules to let things, happen at times that they're comfortable with is really important.
And if it made her feel less anxious, I don't necessarily see there being any problem to having these schedules, other than the fact that you need to stick to them.
Yeah. One thing that has happened before this diary starts is that they're in the process of selling their house, and they're in a temporary house while they then wait for that to sell so they can buy the house they want.
And I must admit, reading that, I went, this must be a very traumatic time for everyone concerned.
Yeah, and so both girls are struggling at the moment when they're writing about this, because there'll be a heightened sense of anxiety around the fact that this isn't their house, and she still considers the house they haven't sold their house, and
which is fair enough, I think, at this point.
Well, technically they still own it.
Exactly. So why? And the fact that her room is not her room in this new house, it's back at her old house, and the fact that she's now having to find a new place for everything to go, because everything has its rightful place. And I have to admit, my husband has this thing about rightful places, particularly the other day when he was cleaning the kitchen. I had some books in there, and he was like, books do not belong in the kitchen, and he basically just picked them up and dumped them in the room where they belong. So although it's kind of not to the extreme that Emma would see that she needs to have things in its place, there is this part where everything has to have its own special, unique area.
Yeah, I thought it was good that her sister actually still lived with everything in boxes, because she couldn't cope with the unpacking and giving it a new place.
And then having to pack it all up again and move it.
Yeah, and that the new place wasn't the new place because it's not the actual house they're going to. So instead she lived out of boxes.
Whereas Emma couldn't
cope with that. So she had to come up with, she did consider it. She says that, I came up with this and I thought this was a good plan, but then there'd be too many boxes and she wouldn't be able to get to stuff. And so instead she decided to come up with, she will put things around and she'll find it a temporary place while it's here.
Yeah, she also talks about the fact that they had bought a specific bookcase from their old house into this new house, or the temporary house, and the fact that she'd already assigned places in that bookcase, and now she was able to put those things back where they were before, as kind of a way to minimise this disruption she was feeling.
Yeah, because the same bookcase will go in the new house, and then the same stuff can go on the bookcase.
Exactly. It minimises the stress. And I can see why that would be stressful for someone who is very much, this is where it lives, this is where it should stay.
Yeah, which was also really hard when their mum said, right, we've got to go through things and you've got to learn to give stuff up as well, because, we all grow up and we go through childhood with lots of different things. You don't need those childhood toys anymore.
Also, the particular issue that she has with collecting things. So she goes through this point, or there are lots of different collections, and when she has a few things of a collection, she has to finish that collection, and then that collection can't be broken up, so it's either all or nothing. It's either you get rid of the whole collection or you get rid of nothing at all.
Yeah, and yet some of it might be gifts, and she has this thing about if someone's given it to her, she can't get rid of it because it's a gift. So,
and it's now, it's been gifted to her.
Yeah, so she has to keep it. So if part of her gift is in the collection, then the rest of the collection has to stay as well because of the gifts that are in it. So there was very, very strict rules about what she could give away, what she could keep, and she made piles, didn't she, of different things. So a quote from the book shows that she says that, first, I have to find everything that was given to me as a present and put it in a pile. She can't give these away. She feels that these are things that she has to keep. Then she adds to the pile anything that she loves, because
you don't get rid of those things.
No, they're the things you really want, okay? Then anything she's not got her money's worth out of, and therefore would feel like it was a waste of money if I gave it away, this goes in the keeping pile. Then anything left is going to be given away, except I take out from that anything that needs to be thrown away, then make sure there is absolutely nothing related to my favourite things mentioned in the pile. By this point, there is very little in the giving away pile. And she does say, though, I suppose the things I don't feel I've got my money's worth out of should still be given away, because then whoever gets them next will use them. However, they'll be paying extra money for them, so a separate amount, so it's different. I've been told that I shouldn't keep things just because they're related to my favourite things, though I disagree. I think getting rid of any part of a collection is bad. So she has these really set rules about how she's going to go about things, and all these rules are there to sort of keep her anxiety down.
Brilliant. So the other things that she finds difficult, or anyone with ASD finds difficult, are the intricacies of social interactions.
Yeah. People with autism do find social interactions one of the hardest things to cope with. Understanding nuances of phrases, words with double meanings, anything like that, jokes, sarcasm, they all come from understanding a lot of facial features, a lot of just general English words and how they're used. So because of that, they do find that a lot harder. So as we've said before, she does find things like joking very hard. When she makes a joke and people laugh, but she didn't realise she was making a joke, she has found that really hard. But there's also things about the theory of mind, which I thought was really interesting. She says that when she does anything or thinks anything, she believes that everybody else already knows that.
We see one of these examples with Emma when she talks about when she was younger and she is doing a colouring in project with a schoolmate, that the schoolmate forgets that they're using her own colouring pencils. So she collects up the colouring pencils, puts them back in the box, but puts them in her bag. But Emma knows that they're her pencils. And she's like, oh, maybe she's just forgotten it. She goes into the bag, gets the pencils out and puts them in her bag. And she doesn't tell this other girl that this is what she's done. And this other girl looks in her bag, can't find the pencils, gets quite upset by it. And then Emma goes, oh yeah, I've got them.
Well, she spends some time looking for them.
Exactly, yeah.
The whole class is like looking for these pencils and she's looking for them. And then she goes,
but they're my pencils and they're in my bag.
Yeah. And she goes, well, why didn't you tell me earlier?
Because I thought you knew.
Yeah. And she really does think that, well, I moved them, so if I know, you must know.
Yeah.
And although she says, I've come to learn that that's not the case in the way that people have told me that's not the case. But she said, but I still find it hard to believe. I still believe that what I think I know,
everyone else knows.
Therefore know.
Are there any other examples in the book?
I think there's more about things where the mother has asked her to talk more about when she's feeling ill. True. She must make sure she tells her mum or her dad, because actually they don't just know.
Exactly.
And so she does, it is things like that where this actually could become quite problematic.
If there was something seriously wrong and she just assumed that everyone knew, she wouldn't necessarily get the treatment that she needed.
Yeah. And so she has had to learn that that's not the case.
And has to be reminded. I think her mum says that she often has to remind Emma to tell her when things are not feeling how they should be.
Yeah, because although Emma recognises that this isn't the case because she's been told, she still feels that it's true. So she can't actually change her mind.
Behaviour.
Yeah. So that kind of understanding that everyone's not the same and everyone doesn't know everything is very difficult for her to sort of get into.
And it's also very difficult for someone to then understand that and then act on that. Particularly if they don't believe it in themselves. If they go, you know what, I don't believe, or I believe that everyone knows what I'm thinking, of course you're not going to be able to change.
Yeah.
And you can't necessarily teach someone how to do that.
Yeah. And and especially as if it's their process of thinking. So if they're thinking literally. So she gives an example of when she's working in a shop. She's volunteering in a charity shop and she sees all of the hangers are hanging a certain way and it doesn't make sense to her. So she changes them all over. And then to her, then that's right. But the manager says, no, I want them the other way. And so she has to change them all back, but she feels that it's wrong. And she doesn't understand how he can come to the conclusion.
And she gets very distressed by this, doesn't she? And that's the distress that she then has to take home to her mum. And her mum has to explain to her, well, there are people out there that have an opinion. It may be different to your opinion, but in some situations you have to go with what that other person has said. But
she still can't follow the reason as to, well, why does this person think that it's that way? Because to me,
it makes no logical sense.
Yeah. And then she has to accept, and she's had to learn to accept, that sometimes you've got a boss and a boss will make a decision and you have to follow it, even if you agree or not. But at the same time, she's like, but it's the wrong decision. And then she's like, but you can't tell people that either, because then that goes into the social interaction and I'm considered rude or, insubordinate as an employee. When actually all she's thinking is her literal thinking has got her stuck in this is the right way and you're doing it the wrong way. And why would you do it? Why would anyone choose to do something the wrong way? So I thought that was a really interesting point in the book, which is why she finds the idea of even working in a charity shop and that anymore really difficult.
And it also feeds into her social anxiety because she just doesn't understand how it should be.
Yeah, I thought what was interesting when her and her sister both go for a walk, and they go for a walk and they both have the way they go, and they both have the point at the road that they cross.
Which happens to be different.
Yeah. So they have to split off, but then that means that she's on her own, but she doesn't like walking on her own. That's why they go together, because she doesn't go out on her own. And so they have to kind of like decide, well, what's worse, going on her own or crossing in the wrong place? And who crosses in the wrong place? Is it Emma or her sister? And so, just going out and crossing the road is a huge issue.
And very stressful.
Yeah.
I felt stressed just reading this. I was like, oh my goodness. Having all of that stuff to contemplate before you even leave the house. And when you get there going, well, this is where I cross, but she crosses over there, and how am I going to cross when... I was just like, no way.
And at the same time having your sensory overload going off, so there might be someone standing down the road where you normally cross, or there might be a car going past or sirens going off, and your body is just overloaded as it is. Yeah, the stress that
sounds like hell.
Yeah, but I thought it was really good the way the book does it, and she never gets down about it. She kind of just gets on with it, and she's really upbeat, and it does, in the blurb it said that she's a funny girl, and she is, and you can see that coming across, even though she might not understand where all of her humour comes from, but just in her frankness can actually be quite a lot of comic humour in it. Finally, we wanted to talk about sort of like some of the decision making. We've touched on bits and pieces of it. They're not understanding other people's opinions and things like that. But the one I wanted to discuss was when they went shopping for the blind. So she needed a new window blind for her bedroom, for the temporary bedroom in this house before they went to the other bedroom, because she needed it blocked out. She has to have the light blocked out.
And the one that was currently in her bedroom was broken, so she needed something as a temporary measure. Yeah,
they're not allowed to replace the blind because it's rented property and they're not there permanently, but they needed a piece of fabric that covered the window, blocked out the light. And the shopkeeper, even she says, the shopkeeper was really good and really helpful. But
I think this person was amazing. And purely because if it was any other person, I'm not saying that all people would be exactly the same, but if she had gone into a place where the people were not as understanding as this particular shopkeeper, it would have been horrific for her.
Yeah.
And they were so accommodating, they helped her. She walks into a particular shop that is so overwhelming with so many fabrics. Already, as we've discussed, her sensory overload would have been at probably quite high.
Yeah.
And she's like, I just need a piece of fabric. Could you help me? And they show her a range of different fabrics. And I think that was so amazing that even when she came up with objections to the fabric, they found something else that could be suitable.
So they start off, she doesn't want something bland because she wants something nice for her room, which is understandable. So she's like, I want something with a nice pattern on it. And that's great. And she should be allowed to have something with a pattern on it. But then that creates problems. She likes the owls, but then some of the owls have sunglasses on.
And how do the sunglasses stay on the owls? First of all, why are owls even wearing sunglasses? Just saying, owls should never be wearing sunglasses.
Which is what she says. But then she also says, how are they staying on? Because their ears aren't, they don't have ears to hold on the sunglasses. And then some of the owls are upside down, which means they definitely they would fall off their head. They wouldn't be on their head still.
So why on earth did anyone in this entire planet decide to make a particular pattern like that?
Yeah, and then I think there was a flowery one, but it means some of the flowers are growing.
The stems were going the wrong way.
And she was like, I can't have that.
Which is understandable.
Yeah, and in the end, they find a Wallace and Gromit pattern, which I love.
That is mine. Can I just say, big shout out to Wallace and Gromit. I had a Wallace and Gromit alarm clock when I was younger, and it was the moving one, and I would absolutely love to get my hands on it. But you'd have Wallace, who would wind up the clock, and then Shaun the sheep would pop out the top. It was amazing. Just saying.
It sounds amazing.
So Wallace and Gromit all the way.
Yeah, but the fabric's not big enough to
Which
fit
is
the
a
window.
big issue.
Yeah. However, they're able to compromise.
But she states that that's the fabric she wants, isn't it? She's like, they keep showing me other fabrics, but I don't want those other fabrics. I want Wallace and Gromit. Yeah. Which is fair enough.
Yeah, she keeps going back to that's the pattern she wants. If only they had a big enough size. So they decide they can tack it to the blind they've got, which then covers the rest of the room. But then she's still got the fabric she wants, but she's going to have to compromise with the outside. Now, I think because it's a temporary home,
it isn't so much of an issue.
She can take that compromise, and she says that. She's like, you know, because this is all temporary, I can do this, but I still get kind of what I want. So, yeah, and I think she touches on the fact that some people might think she just wants to get her own way, but actually it's her brain telling her that's right and that's wrong, which is a different concept to thinking, I want that, therefore I should get my own way.
Yeah, and yeah, I think the shopkeeper was amazing.
Yeah, and actually, I have to say, there's a lot more shops than that are getting much better with autistic children and how to approach them. There's cinemas that are doing autistic showings. There's, I think, Legoland even do a few special autistic days. So, you know, on those days, it's specific. So they don't have like all the music on at once. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, they do things that means that it's just not as overwhelming as it could be on those days. And, you know, you're surrounded by other children that have similar ways of going as you, so then you're surrounded by people that are similar as well, which is good, because I think that it does help that she knows someone else, her sister, who is also autistic, and that so she can recognise some of the same traits.
And I mean, it must be really difficult for a parent with a child that is suffering from ASD, particularly because of the way that they have these issues associated with the sensory overload, the issues with the being able to make compromises about certain things. And it just, I don't know if you read in the media recently, Paddy McGuinness's wife, their son suffers from ASD, and their local McDonald's was closed, and the only thing that he could tolerate was the McDonald's chip. And so she decided that she couldn't have her son not eating, that she would then have to make an hour-long trip to get her son some chips that he would eat. And just thinking that you go, well, why doesn't he eat other things? And why is she going to so much effort? Because this child is refusing to eat because the only thing he can tolerate are those chips.
And it's about, you know, what they can tolerate. It's not a choice. And I think
it's
that's
not being difficult.
No, and I think people do assume that it's about being difficult. It's about them just not having that choice, whereas actually it isn't like that. So a particular bit that I liked in the book was where they talked about things that had happened before they knew about her diagnosis. So they just hadn't been even suspected, so they didn't know. So it was a particular Christmas, and she came downstairs and said, I looked at the presents and thought, that's not very much. So that is exactly what I said. Mum and Dad were really cross and took all of her presents away, although they did return them later. And she says, you know, this is what happened, and this is because I saw it and I just said it. And she didn't mean, oh, why haven't I got more?
She just made the statement of what she observed was the fact that there weren't as many as they were last year.
Yeah, and so I do think that that was a really good example of how her literal thinking went, how someone could take it as being rude. And that was her own parents. And even now they say, you know, we didn't...
You realise now,
why,
looking back.
Yeah, and now they try really hard to make everything the same and things like that. But at the time, you didn't know. So actually not having a diagnosis can actually cause a lot of problems within a family as well.
And I mean, I love the fact that she talks about Christmas with such fondness. I mean, I'm not a particular fan of Christmas, but she talks about it with such, I don't know, the decorations and everything. She's just like, talks about it with such...
She loves it.
Yeah.
However, she finds the gift part really difficult.
Exactly. This is probably the last bit that I think
we're going to discuss
today, is the fact that she finds that giving gifts at Christmas to be very, very stressful. She's fine when it's gift giving at her birthday time, because at her birthday time it is purely for her. There's no one else. You don't have to worry about reciprocating the gift giving, so you don't have to worry about giving gifts to the other person and then them giving it back to you, because how is she going to know how much someone else has spent on the Christmas gifts?
Yeah, but it even goes beyond that. She says, you know, events like Christmas are very stressful because everyone has to have a present that elicits the same emotional response or costs the same amount, and preferably both. So not only has she got to predict how much you're going to spend on her, but
how
also
much you're going to like
how much she's going to like it, so that she can give the same likeness back, which, you know, none of us can predict. So, you know, it's...
Particularly with Becky, because she buys really strange gifts. Only joking.
You love my gifts.
I do love your gifts. I apologise. I was just being cheeky.
So yeah, it is one of those things where you go, how stressful that must be. An event that she says, I love Christmas. The only bit I don't like is the whole idea of presents.
But I also love how her mum has come up with a solution where she basically has said to the family, each of us gets to spend this much on each other, because then that takes away at least part of the stress.
Yes, and then she's just got to do the liking side, which is, is something that even her mum can't regulate for her. She has to work that out for herself. So yeah, I really like this book. I think that it's a really good example of somebody with autism. I think it opens up a lot of doors to understanding how their minds work differently and how the anxiety, which I think is a really understated part of autism that a lot of people don't understand, and then where they think that it's choice rather than actually fixed thinking. So I do think it's a really good book for anybody who works in education, but also anyone who's a parent, but also just anybody who thinks it'd be interesting to see how other people think.
I mean, I've recommended this book to a friend who has her nephew has autism, and so I suggested that this would be a good read for her, and also to recommend to his mum so she could get some insight into what might be happening inside his brain. I also thought that it did highlight different things that I had never considered before.
Like part of it.
Yeah, exactly. Because my experience is probably limited to certain aspects of my husband's behaviour, and also to the media, such as the TV things and film things, there is such a narrow view that they present that I wouldn't necessarily have understood how traumatic certain things would be for individuals with autism. Particularly the fact that if you say one thing, that is it, that is what they're going to do. And yeah, to not necessarily get angry. I mean, with the borderline personality disorder, that's kind of hard because, understanding...
She'll go to emotion.
Yeah, exactly. All of a sudden you've triggered my emotion because you're not necessarily doing what I would expect, and then I get angry because I think you're then being mean to me, and it's not. It's the fact that this is the way you think and this is the way you operate. Yeah. And I also thought that it was really good that her mum talks about the distinction between the autism and the social anxiety, and that the importance of getting them treated the right way in
and
each
separately.
Instance. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not considering them as one condition. It's pulling them apart and going, this is the anxiety part and this is the autism part. Even though there can be issues where you might not necessarily be able to distinguish which is which. I mean, an autism meltdown may be as a result of social anxiety, but it could be autonomous to the social anxiety. It could just be the autism, and it must be extremely difficult to identify which is going to be which
and which one causes the other. So,
exactly.
Are your autistic traits causing the meltdown, or is the meltdown
as a result of the anxiety?
And she does talk about panic attacks and stuff in the book as well. There's so much more in this book than we've talked about, so please read it and see what else there is. But I do think you're right. She does think, and that's why it's called Autism Anxiety and Me, not just autism or not just anxiety. So she does separate them. I also think the way that she says it's autism, anxiety and me, it's not just a story of me.
Things, exactly.
And I think that's important, although she does say it's part of her and it always has been, so don't ask her when she got has she only developed it since she got diagnosed. But I think it is that nice link of actually they don't become her, but they are part of the way that she works.
Exactly. So that was Autism, Anxiety and Me. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you feel that you need additional support with your mental health, please call the Samaritans on 116 123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next podcast will be about autism, and our next book will be A Bitter Pill to Swallow by Tiffany Golar. To find out more, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We would really love to hear what you think about this podcast. Please get in touch with us at our Facebook page, which is the Mental Health Book Club, or at our Twitter, which is at MHBC_podcast. And if you like the podcast, please share it with your family and friends and leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.